everyone. Thanks for joining us. This reading from Water Water by Billy Collins is Bob Beitcher's idea. I am honored and pleased when Bob comes on the show, as I am when Corinne, John, and Beth return. The marvelous readers in order of their appearance are Bob Beitcher, Corinne Conley, John Towey, Beth Ruscio. Here's Bob Beitcher.
Thank you, Harry. And I'm delighted that you include me among those readers because I don't think of myself that way, but I appreciate it. Billy Collins, U.S. Poet Laureate from 2001 to 2003, has a long and distinguished career as a poet as well as a teacher of poetry. For brevity's sake, so we can get on with his poetry, I'll make it short. He was born in 1941 and is a native New Yorker. His father worked on Wall Street and his mother was a nurse with a great memory for verse and cultivated a love of words in her young son and only son, Billy. The poems we are reading today are from his 13th collection of poems. Billy Collins is known to many as one of America's favorite poets, but don't mistake favorite for simple or commercial. His simplicity of language is deceiving, as we'll discover in the poems we hear today. The title of this new collection, as Harry remarked, Water, Water, comes from the Coleridge ballad, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Like Coleridge, Billy Collins' poetry makes the familiar strange and the strange familiar. In this collection, Billy Collins, at age 84, also focuses on the theme of aging. I hope you enjoy this selection of poems from me and Harry, and I'm going to kick off the readings now. The first poem is Marijuana. When I was young and dreamy, I longed to be a poet, not one with his arms wrapped around the universe or on his knees before a goddess, not waving from Mount Parnassus, nor wearing a cape like Lord Byron. Rather, just reporting on a dog or an orange. But one soft night in California, I walked outside during a party, lay down on the lawn beneath a lively sky, and after an interlude of nonstop gazing, I happened to swallow the moon. Yes, I opened my mouth in awe and swallowed the full moon whole. And the moon dwelled within me when I returned to the lights of the party, where I was welcomed back with understanding and hilarity, and was recognized long into the night as the man who swallowed the moon. He who had walked out of a storybook and was dancing now with a girl in the kitchen. Ode to Joy. Friedrich Schiller called joy the spark of divinity. But she visits me on a regular basis, and it doesn't take much for her to appear. The salt next to the pepper by the stove, the garbage man ascending his station on the back of the moving garbage truck, or I'm just eating banana in the car and listening to Buddy Guy. In other words, she seems down to earth, like a girl getting off a bus with a suitcase and no one's there to meet her. It's a little after 4 in the afternoon, one of the first warm days of spring. She sits on her suitcase to wait and slides on her sunglasses. How do I know she's listening to the birds? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. It didn't take a lot of staring at the alphabet embroidered in a frame on the wall of a doctor's waiting room and letters round and straight, blue and orange, before that cryptogram began to look like a word in itself. One long crush of sound and sense, impossible to pronounce or comprehend. Was this then the very first word uttered by some god of language in a yawp that later would be combined into all the words we know, the shorter ones we see every day, whether in a magazine or a poem by Amy Lowell. But there's the nurse at the door calling, "William," making me officially next, and somehow reminding me that the letters are there in order for children lined up in school. To sing the notes of every letter in a chorus of vowels and consonants, or for you to say backwards as you stand in the rain by your ticking car, halted by the law in your rush to get from A to B. Obad. I'm in bed with one eye open on a gloomy morning, the room as shadowy as the one in Larkin's wake-up poem, and the light between the drapes as gray as Whistler's Sideways Mother. But once I slip into my Hawaiian slippers, I sense an uptick about to occur, perhaps caused by 3 oranges in a bowl, or a man out for a run with his pug hurrying behind him as I pull open the blinds in the front room. It could be the lemon tree, bowing under the weight of lemons that I see when swimming on my back, or the big photo of Harriet Tubman on a billboard everyone sped by, or that skeleton of a rabbit you pointed to one afternoon in the dune grass with the surf crashing away. Eventually, this thing or that will get the day rolling on the parallel rails of another month. Then off we go, Mr. Wednesday and I, waving as we slip around these many curves. Him a central feature of every future week, me with one less day to live. Like Philip Larkin, sitting up in bed, alone and startled, his wall calendar in flames. When a man loves something. Late one night at a roadhouse a little down from where I lived, on the edge of a California desert, I happened to hear Percy Sledge live. I remember his voice rising to such heights of conviction that night. I felt lucky to have spotted his name on the lit up yellow sign outside. As I listened over my drink, I silently wished him well and extended that wish to Mrs. Sledge and all the little sledges, if there happened to be any around. Years later, when I lived in Florida, we had a plumber whose name was Lynn Hammer. I like to introduce people to one another, but Lynn Hammer said he had never heard of Percy Sledge, and put his head back under the sink. So many miscues like that these days, as when I remarked in a store that featured fancy pastries, "This isn't your grandmother's coffee shop." And the girl glanced up at me as if I were from another planet, which, of course, I was, if the past can be added to the ones already orbiting the sun, including our small blue one, which is carrying you and me and everyone else, along with the singer and the plumber, the barista, and yes, maybe even her grandmother, in the big oval somewhere in the icy immensity of space. BC AD. One autumn afternoon in the mid-70s, when the 2 realms of Christian time were still being referred to as BC and AD, a student of mine raised her hand. She had found an error in our textbook. "The dates of Plato are messed up," she said. "How could he be born in 428, then die in 327? What, was he going backwards?" I suppose you could say that everyone born before Christ was, in a sense, going backward in time without knowing it, I said. Then from the back of the room was heard, did they all start going forward at Christmas time? There are moments in a teacher's life when a discussion has gotten interestingly out of control, and it's time for the allegorical figure of reason to enter the stadium on her docile horse, festooned with facts and numbers. So while some students joked about the ancients and their tunics getting younger by the year, I drew a long horizontal line on the board to represent all of human time. Then a vertical line intersecting it at the birth of Christ. And I added a stick figure of Plato standing on the line and a small zero off to the side. You see, I announced, Plato was born 428 years before the birth of Christ. But how did they know that, she asked. Excellent question, I replied, shaking my head. Then from the back, another excellent one. And why do the languages change from English to Latin, from before Christ to Anno Domini? You would think it would be the other way around. You would think, I repeated, moving over to the big school window, one finger pressed pensively to my lips to observe the orange and yellow trees, patches of blue beyond them, and a few ordinary birds darting through the scene, until the bell, signaling the end of our class and the beginning of something else, rang. This was, after all, an introduction to poetry.
What if it turns out there is no afterlife? That may come as a letdown to some, but the good news is that the believers of every religion won't experience the least disappointment for the simple reason that they will be dead at that point and incapable of experiencing anything. Same goes for the skeptics, agnostics, and the card-carrying atheists. No opportunity to smirk or brag for the same reason mentioned above. I was thinking about this on my drive to the beach one Sunday when I saw a flock of well-dressed people filing into a clapboard church under a tall white steeple. I did not turn the car around and pull up to the church door and deliver this news from the roof of the car. No, I drove on with the radio up loud and the windows down, content to keep those tidings to myself. A faithless congregation of one, now driving much too fast and just as afraid of heaven as he is of hell. Being Sonny Rollins. One of the dangers of piping Sonny Rollins into my earbuds on my Sunday morning outing is that I start wishing that I were Sonny Rollins as I face again the blunt fact that I am not. I usually run along a curvy cinder path on the edge of a lake that sparkles in the sun. I spot a heron, a pair of ducks, and 5 white ibises. But the fact remains that I am still not Sonny Rollins. I watch hundreds of scattered blackbirds wheeling and squawking in the sky. But that cowbell intro into I'm an old cowhand reminds me that I am someone other than Sonny Rollins. Most of the runners and dog walkers give me some kind of morning greeting. Then a guy about my age shoots me a look that says, "There's no way you are Sonny Rollins." That does it. If I am not Sonny Rollins, then none of you other people are either. Not you in the tracksuit or you with the schnauzer. Not one Sonny Rollins in the pack of you. And so I began exercising the muscles of sarcasm as I continued to put down everyone in sight for being inferior to Sonny Rollins and every other jazz giant. A pointless habit that ended only when I found you at home in the kitchen. You who have no desire to be Sonny Rollins. You who dream only of being Anita O'Day. Fire in the movies. Is there anyone out there who can name a movie star, a movie about a writer of the 18th or 19th century that does not feature a fireplace into whose manic flames are tossed, usually one at a time, the pages of a now lost literary masterpiece? The scene could be a manor house or a hovel. Fire doesn't know the difference, any more than it can distinguish a voucher from a poem that could alter the course of literature. The culprit is usually a rival, or the wife, driven mad by neglect, or a mistress, her damp hair in tendrils. But the best is the author himself, standing transfixed by the mantle as he consigns his best work to the blaze. At least that was the case in the movie I saw last night, where Coleridge is seen burning the freshly written pages of Kubla Khan, his drug-sunken face flickering above the fire. I watched it in our house on a brick street where the only fire is the pilot light burning in the kitchen stove, where my wife just kissed me goodnight, and where I am now sitting up in a chair like a big squirrel with glasses on his nose, concocting a story about how I killed my only rival in a duel on a snowy field one Russian winter 135 years ago. Deep time. You surprised me when you wheeled a suitcase out the front door, calling me a name over your shoulder, before driving off in a cloud of discontent. Since that occurred, at least an hour has passed. And just to give your decision some historical perspective, it has been 14 years since our wedding, and 4 billion years after the appearance of matter. Yes, you chose to abandon me 2 billion years after the birth of multicellular life, not to mention 245 million years since the last dinosaur shook the earth, and many decades after the invention of bubble gum, movies, and the fountain pen. But now I am back in the present, comforted by the depth of prehistorical time, leaning against the kitchen sink, and also spinning through infinite space at an angle of 23.5 degrees. As I examine the details of a rural scene on the side of this Delft teacup while waiting for the water to boil and for you to come back home. Unless, of course, you are waiting out there for me to apologize, in which case you will find yourself all alone at the end of human time, beholding the tall, cascading waves of fire, sinkholes of ice, and that merciless quartet of horsemen in their scarlet vestments, who are now wheeling their steeds around and appear to be galloping furiously in your direction. The Monet Conundrum. Is every one of these poems different from the others? He asked himself as the rain quieted down. Or are they all the same poem, haystack after haystack, at different times of day, different shadows and shades of hay? The Cardinal. They say a child might grow up to be an artist if his sandcastle means nothing until he leads his mother over for a look. I'm that way with my wife. Little things don't mean much until I report back from the front. I ran into Rick from the gift shop. The post office flag is at half-mast. I counted the cars on the freight train. Who else in the world would put up with such froth before it dissolves on the surf? But early this morning, while I was alone in the pool, a Vatican red cardinal flashed down from the big magnolia and landed on the deck right next to where I was standing in the water. Here was an event worth mentioning. But better, I considered to keep this one to myself, to make it a secret I alone would harbor and possess. Then I went back to watching the bird, pecking now at the edge of the garden, with the usual swivel-headed wariness of a bird. I was an unobserved observer of this private moment, with only my head above water at very close range for man and bird, considering my large head and lack of feathers. A sudden rustling in that tall tree revealed the gray and pink female, the vigilant mate with whom he shared his life. But I wouldn't share that with my wife, not while she buttered toast or worked the Sunday crossword. Indeed, I would take the two cardinals to my grave. In a little while, she appeared on the porch, wearing a bright yellow robe and carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. We talked about a few ordinary things, as couples do to pass the time. She told me about her plan to paint her office and about a party we had missed. And I told her how good the coffee was, and about the 2 cardinals, the male pecking in the garden, the female flapping her wings above, making sure not to leave anything out, including my idea about keeping it a secret, and that really dumb thing about the grave.
Water, water. I do some of my best thinking when standing at the bottom of a lake up to my chin in lake water. I like squinting down the length of it or staring up at the velvet sky. You know, I don't care if my head looks like a beach ball from the shore, as long as the lake still holds me up. And I keep my balance with extended arms. You know, one morning, standing in Lake Ontario, I could remember no greater happiness. Unable to contain the feeling, I took one step, and for a moment, I was beside myself. That kind of thing can go on for some time. Thoughts running through my head like a stampede of antelopes. Only sometimes one of the young stumbles and is set upon by a pack of cheetahs. This is a doomsday thought about the future and the lake drying up and leaving me abandoned or rising above its banks to intimidate me. Such are the 2 most basic human fears, as if both could not occur at once, as they do when I dream that I'm both alone and smothered by a dozen women. Meanwhile, swimmers swim by on their way to sunbathe on a raft. Speedboat lifts me a little in the wake, all part of life when one is half afloat or half bouncing off the sandy floor with your toes. And I'm far enough from shore not to hear the shouts of foreboding and calamity. I know the end is near. Seawater will rise, flood the aquifers. The basement sofa will begin to float. So hard to picture it from here, though, what with the sentinel of pines along the shoreline and just enough water to fill the lake exactly to the brim. Days of teenage glory. When I was busy committing the crime of high school, the songs on the radio took about 2 minutes to play, and smoking a cigarette took about 5. So the things happened fairly quickly as we passed the time, and time passed us without a sound except for the singing. Singing by the Oreos, the Doves, the Clovers, plus Lee Andrews and the Hearts, who could do no wrong, according to me. One night in the spring, I even saw the Jesters battling the Paragons on the stage of the Brooklyn Paramount. Then wandered the Borough in a drizzle. You know, these days, if I'm not at my desk or sleep in the back room, I'm sitting in the garage with a cup of coffee, watching the rain and waiting for that startling chord that concludes, "He's gone," by the Chantels. Those 5 notes, the rungs in a ladder, pointed into the vacant teenage sky. Well, there were students together in the Bronx at St. Anthony of Padua School, but they named themselves after a rival neighborhood school, St. Francis de Chantal, having wisely rejected the Padua, as I imagined them doing one afternoon. Well, where are the Chantels now? Playing in the snows of yesteryear, or bathing in the waters of childhood? Are they hanging in the domestic air like a smoke ring over a kitchen table? Or like one sailing from a girl's mouth in a car somewhere, only to vanish in a boy's face, reflected pink in the rearview mirror? Culture, textuality, and space. Early yesterday evening, I sat in a downtown train reading a book titled Narrativity, Myth, and Revolution. I noticed a woman sitting across from me who was reading an even thicker book titled Warfare, Gender, and Historiography. What a pair, as my father used to say, about most of my mother's married friends, particularly a neighbor named Babs, who drank bourbon highballs and crossed her legs on the couch in my parents' living room while her husband nursed a ginger ale. What a pair, I muttered to myself as I rose from the Astor Place stop and spotted a man in a wool cap who had his head in a doorstop called Sexual Identity, Upheaval, and Illusion. God, we all deserve each other, I muttered, stepping onto the platform and eyeing the red lights of the train as it bore all the people and their books into the future. It was a sudden reminder that I was running late for tonight's lecture. Quote, hyper-time, death in the future of the future, end quote. The last in a series of talks that had begun when the city was simmering hot. I realized, pulling my scarf tight around my throat. The flaneur, that's a French word used in the 19th century. It's an urban male who was a stroller, a lounger, a saunterer, or even a loafer. The flaneur. The boulevards are places to ponder. So he saunters out in the evening, the better to appreciate the crisis of modern life. I thought I'd try this for a while, but instead of being in Paris, I was in Florida. So his inspiring sights were not available to me, despite my pledge to aimlessness. No kiosks or glass-ceilinged arcades, no beggar with a handkerchief covering her hair, no woman holding her hat down as she crossed the street, no Victor Hugo look-alike, scowling in a great coat, no girls selling fruit or sweets from a tart, no prostitutes circled under a street lamp, no solitude of a moving crowd, which will drive me to a new kind of sadness. I did notice a man looking at his watch, and I reflected for a moment on the passage of time. Then I saw two ladies in lime green and pink, and I considered the fate of the sister arts as they stepped into the street, arm in arm. Who needs Europe? I muttered into my scarf as a boy flew by on his skateboard, flinging me into a reverie on the folly of youth and the continuing estrangement of my life. Thought a rarity on paper. Here I'm thanking you for this fine copy of Jack Spicer's posthumous One Night Stand and Other Poems. The Gray Fox Press, 1980, introduction by Donald Allen and Robert Duncan. It's such a rare little bird. I was careful to purify my hands before sliding it out of the mylar sleeve. I was careful too when I turned the pages. But when Jesus began making out his will and Alice in Wonderland went missing from the chessboard, the book had to be restrained from taking flight and flapping its many wings against the window pane. So now the front cover is bent back a little, like a clam with its shell slightly ajar, the way Spicer's mouth could look sometimes when he would see him at Gino and Carlo, or in the park at the Church of St. Peter and Paul, where we would often sit cross-legged in the shade. There on hot summer afternoons, he'd suffer the company of young poets if they observed the courtesy of arriving with cold quart bottles of Renier ale, as green as the sports section of the paper. It was a practice that my friend Tom and I and his friend A.B. Cole followed religiously. Spicer even called us, quote, the Jesuits, for he knew where we had gone to school. To be imperfectly truthful, I was intimidated by his reality. A lonely, homosexual adult who dressed funnily in summery shirts, baggy pants, belt buckle onto the side, his sad moon face pocked as the moon itself, and carrying a name like a medieval vendor's. He'd talk about poetics, of which he knew nothing, about the other Berkeley poets, but we poetry juniors felt more at home when he talked about Willie McCovey, and we would be on to another still cold quart. Then a forceful wind came and blew Jack Spicer away. He was found a year later at the age of 40 on the floor of an elevator, going neither up nor down. Later still, Tom would be blown over a golden bridge, his soft inner arm full of holes, and I sadly lost track of the sardonic Andy Cole. And here I still remain, more than twice Spicer's final age, rolling through the pages of his little book, listening to his bewildering birds, and watching beauty walk, not like a lake, but among the coffee cups and soup tureens, caused me to open both my hands and let this green aeronaut of paper lift off and fly around my yellow house and beat its wings against glass. The thrilling sky continues to change, slowly from blue to black, and then miraculously back to blue once more. The end of mine.
Once in a dog's age. Just because a dog or a cat or even a hen doesn't know how old it is, doesn't mean it's not that old. Every creature moves along the treadmill of time at its own pace, most insects hurrying along while the tortoise lumbers under its armor. Many do not look their age, but sometimes you can tell. Take that ancient sparrow barely moving along as if on crutches. But what about this crow on a fence post by the roadside? No telling how old he is. Today could be his birthday for all we know, and who's to say that perching on a fence post is not a fine way to celebrate a special day? My next one's still months away, but when it finally rolls up to the door, I will remember that crow of a certain age and join him on another fence post down the road, showing off my blue-black feathers, my shiny head always swiveling over a field of flowering potatoes and under an immense silvery sky, as one car comes and goes, then another from the other direction. The Brooklyn Dodgers. Let me get myself centered here. Yes, the Brooklyn Dodgers. Whenever my father would take me to the ballpark, I would open up the newspaper the next morning to check out the box score. Not to see the runs, hits, and errors, which I already knew, but to find the total attendance and make sure my presence had been recorded. The way I saw it, whatever the total, I would be the number at the end. So if the figure was 24,376, I would be the 6. The only one to be truly counted as an individual. Without me in the stands, the number would be a 5. Or if some guy came late, it would jump to a 7. I was the one who made it a 6. And there was my digit right there on the kitchen table in black and white, just the way the typesetter said it. Proof that I existed and one of my earliest appearances in print. Frost at the stove. Like a piece of ice on a hot stove, the poem must ride on its own melting. Robert Frost. I thought about the simple beauty of this while I was watching a dollop of butter glide across the surface of a heated pan, a more customary sight at the stove, then tossed in some chopped onions, and when they became translucent, a bowl full of shrimp, yum, peeled and chilled. And after the cooking was done, I pictured Frost sitting down to his dinner of a heated ice cube, more like a thimbleful of warm water by now, while I tied a napkin around my neck in the manner of a famished coyote, knife and fork upright in my hands, then dug into a plate of Louisiana shrimp resting on a bed of parsley sprinkled rice and raised to the master craftsman a frosty glass of Chenin Blanc, carried all the way from France to accompany another game happily and carelessly played without a net. Drawing a pineapple. The assignment was to draw a pineapple, but I began with some scruffy hedges and a cluster of maples in the background, for I had made the mistake of picturing the pineapple outdoors instead of on the table where it clearly had been placed. And that led me to include a chain of low mountains in the distance and some lighter ones beyond them. And what still life would be complete without a sun emitting shine lines in the sky? I asked, but no one answered. And so I persisted, adding some clouds shaded on their undersides and even a few airborne seagulls, all part of the ever-expanding sphere of my sketch pad until my runaway pencil vanished like into a little point in the distance. Poor pineapple, I realize now, overlooked symbol of hospitality, sculpted fruit of welcome by the door, reduced now to a dot in a landscape. Forgive my adolescent pencil in its eagerness to explore the world for bypassing the simple fact of you, for not seeing the world that you are, the rough armadillo plates of your surface and your pale yellow succulent interior waiting on a rudimentary table for the unstoppable downswing of a blade. Autobiography. This morning, I began writing mine, but 5 hours and many legal pads later, I had gotten only as far as my conveyance from the French hospital to my parents' apartment. Of course, I could have devoted less time to the bodily process of my birth, the details of my wicker bassinet, as well as the many metallic animals endlessly circling above me as I lay supine, helpless, and staring. And so after a sandwich for lunch with so much work ahead of me, including a catalogue raisonné of my toys, an account of the tiles on the bathroom wall behind which once resided my imaginary friend, I decided to abandon the whole project and maybe settle for a little essay on the subject of the wallpaper or the taste of prunes. Plus, I already could hear the voices of the vicious reviewers happy to dwell on my shortcomings, my love of personification, my melancholic tricycle, for instance, the limits of the first person selfish point of view, not to mention the overall lack of a clear theme. And they would be right about the pages and pages of senseless dialogue, not to mention the tedium of chronological order, even though that seems to be the way my life has chosen to unfold itself, at least so far. A change of heart. I once expressed the wish for a tomb topped by a white marble angel, her head buried in her folded wing. But now I'd rather you just copy out that little poem by Murrietta, fold it into quarters, then slip it into my shirt pocket before I am incinerated in a chamber. It's the one where he used to think that death came only to others. But now, in his ultimate hour, he realizes that this happiness is also his.
Thank you, Beth. Bob, Corinne, John, could you please come on the screen and we'll talk a little bit about the poetry and the reading. I just want to say thank you all for your wonderful reading. And a couple of things that I love about Billy Collins is that, you know, he finds divinity in common things. He has clarity, simplicity, but there's also revelation. And anybody who mentions, you know, Robert Frost along with Philip Larkin and Percy Sledge, remember his song, When a Man Loves a Woman? I mean, after he says that, what else can you say? Sonny Rollins, Coleridge, and my favorite is Jack Spicer. I mean, we poets, we love Jack Spicer and Robert Duncan and Robin Blazer, Berkeley Trio, and his sense of poetics and how he described Jack Spicer and then the metaphor when he passed on. And the other thing is just so human, doing human things. And he also has such a depth of time. And I love the poem that Bob read, BCAD, and that distinction. And so those are a couple of my observations. And also, just lastly, I love that he names things. I mean, sometimes, you know, poets, they get rhetorical, but you name things and we're able as readers to see what he's talking about and to be able to share his journey with him, the emotion and the visual, etc. Bob Beitcher, what would you like to say?
Well, you said a lot, Harry, and I would agree with everything you said. I mean, what I love about this book of Billy Collins' poetry, along with his others, is he's truly an accessible poet. Unlike a lot of modern poets, he has a sense of humor. There isn't a lot of anger, bitterness, or anything. The emotional range is always on the side of joy and pensiveness and meditation and kindness. And, to your point, he just takes, he makes ordinary things extraordinary and divine in his observation of them. And just the wisdom and beauty of his reflections on his own life are so lovely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he doesn't take himself too seriously, but he takes himself very seriously.
Yeah.
And he takes the world around him very seriously, but in a lighthearted, gentle, compassionate way.
Corinne?
Well, it's all those things that Bob said. He doesn't take himself seriously, and yet so many things in his poems are very serious. He's kind of like, I feel like he's my next door neighbor. Or that I wish he were, because he seems to have my thoughts. I have the many things he discusses. I feel as though, well, I felt that way. Well, I know what he's talking about there, but he says them all with so much more understanding. Or he puts a lot of meaning into these ordinary thoughts we all have. So I can understand him being a favorite of so many people, because he reaches right into your ordinary life and you feel as though I could have said that, but then you realize after you hear the way he said it, you couldn't say it the way he said it.
John?
He's so conversational. That's what I love about him too. I'm his age. I mean, I'm a year older than he is. He's someone I'd like to know. I don't always want to know certain people, but he makes me want to know him. What else I love about him is that everybody's talked about how real he is about things. And then all of a sudden he takes off in these flights of fancy that go wherever they go. It's just kind of wonderfully crazy. He's the most popular poet since Robert Frost. He has sold 100,000 copies of his first 3 books of poetry. I mean, nobody does that. No contemporary poet sells like that. But he's contemporary, yeah. Anyway, I loved him a lot, Harry. I think he's just amazing. Amazing.
There was a story, to pick up on John, there was a story that he was offered a 6-figure advance for, I think it was 3 books of poetry, which was unheard of in the world of poetry.
Mm-hmm.
For a poet to get offered that kind of advance for poetry books. And that's because the books sell. He's America's favorite poet, but I don't think any of us would consider his poetry, playing down to the crowd.
No. Did he
yeah.
not accept that offer, that 6-figure offer?
He said he had to talk to you about it.
Oh. But nobody has been that popular since Robert Frost.
That's right.
Even
right. No, he did accept that offer.
Wow.
Oh, he did? Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Is he in good health? Does anybody know? He's 80. It says he's 84. He's born in 1941,
Yeah.
March 22nd.
Yeah, as far as I know, he's in good health. I believe he lives these days in Florida.
It's like the line
Which
of
is
the
why
poem.
he references Florida a few times in his
that's
poetry.
probably
But
where he lives. Because that
Harry,
line
I
of the
think,
poem,
I think maybe, yeah.
the line of the poem that goes that, yeah, but I'm not in Paris. I can't see it because I'm in
Right.
Florida.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe he's still the. Anyway, he looks very healthy in all of the contemporary photos that I've seen of him online.
Yeah.
He looks
Well,
healthy.
I'm sure he is very healthy because he's always walking out around lakes and,
Right.
sitting in the lake up to his neck. I love where it said he's.
But I don't know when he wrote that. He could have written
Ontario.
that 20 years ago, Corinne.
Yeah.
Beth, what
Yeah,
would
but
you
I
like?
imagine he's still out
Probably.
there listening to the birds.
Yeah, probably.
Let's hear Beth. Yeah.
I know.
Let's hear Beth. Now that we can hear her. Yeah.
But now that you can actually hear me, I was thinking it's like the slow, steady hum of someone sitting next to you in a car narrating the view. While you're driving and can't really look, he's like looking, oh, look at there, oh, look at there, look at there. So it's that kind of, or even in a room, if you're sitting in a room with him, he'd be the kind of person that'd be always leaning over. Hey, did you hear that? Hey, did you hear this? So there's
And
something about that. He's noticing the things that go unnoticed.
Yeah.
One of the poems that I read of his reminded me of Ted Kooser, who was the poet laureate for a while. I heard him read up at Idlewild once, and he talked about this kind of is in reference to his reading the Brooklyn Dodgers, who was there. He talks about like who was in attendance, and he counts himself as that one number. Ted Kooser talked about a guy who kept in his wallet a fraying clipping from a local newspaper, which listed his name as being as being a witness at an accident between the collision of two cars. That was his sole mention in press. So there's something about Billy Collins that exalts, those kinds of things, those kind of otherwise unnoticed, unheralded things.
Well said, Beth, and thank you, each one of you, for your observations and your wonderful interpretations of Billy Collins. Next Tuesday, the wonderful poets Corinne Topple and Patty Sayburn will be with us. And thank you once again, Bob Beitcher, Corinne Conley, John Towey, Beth Ruscio.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you, everyone. That was really wonderful.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone.